So before we get started, I just want to give a huge thank you to ArcLight for being such an awesome partner, and also to Universal for letting us screen the movie before it's in theaters. Gentlemen, congratulations.
Thank you.
So, Lee, I want to start with you. What did you do on this movie? Because it's all like one take.
Absolutely nothing. It was a dream job. Seriously, though, there was a lot of obviously pre-planning in the execution of these extended takes to get them to be seamless, and hopefully they were seamless, apart from the one scripted cut where Schofield gets shot in the head, and we cut to black. Oh, there's Sam. Perfect timing, Sam. We've run out of things to say.
Sorry I'm late.
Thank you for joining us. Very nice to see you.
Caught in traffic. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I was just going to tell the story of your grandfather then, but you came in, so...
Were you really? You could probably do it word for word. I'm sure Roger could by now. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was asking Lee what exactly he did on the movie, because it was all...
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He just needed a paycheck for 6 months.
It was awesome.
He can't say what he did, but I can say he was actually an incredibly crucial part of the whole process, because there's a great David Mamet line about the editor. He says, in the cutting room, the director is serving two masters, the movie and himself. It's the editor's job to just serve the movie. And Lee has an unerring way of judging performance, and in terms of feedback and actually trying to give us a sense of the movie that we were making, he was crucial. And stitching together the shots, obviously, but not just that, but creating a sound world and temp music, and so we had a sense of a full movie, fully realized movie coming straight back to us, kind of the day after we shot it. And often as a director, you tend to, if you've done, let's say, 28 takes or 29 takes, you tend to get drawn to takes 27, 28, 29. And Lee has a way of, he doesn't like knowing what my selected take is. He watches them all, every single thing we shoot. And he would often say, I know there was a mistake in take 12, but we can deal with that. Look at take 12 again. And he was always right. And there were 2 or 3 occasions when I sensed something was wrong with the scene, and he gave feedback, and we reshot it. And it was really because of Lee's feedback. So it was like having another filmmaker working with me, because that's what he is. And so he was actually, joking aside, a pivotal part of it. He can't say that about himself, because that would sound grand, but I can.
I would have. But it sounded better coming from you.
I think I speak for everyone who watches this film that we really want to see how this thing was made. Please tell me there's like a 2-3 hour documentary on the making of this movie.
Sadly not. There was an EPK crew with us the whole time, but you know, the most interesting part of it in many ways was the 6 months of prep, because even though we only shot for 65 days, I say only, but I mean, for a movie this scale, that's not actually that long. It's certainly less than a half of a Bond movie, for example. It was made many times before that, because we had to start in empty fields with the boys with scripts in their hands, and we literally, me and Roger and the boys and a couple of other folk, just walking through those empty spaces, marking out the journey with flags and poles. And only then could we start to construct the trenches, no man's land, quarries, orchards, farmhouses. The entire set, the entire thing was built around the actors, built around the script, built around the journey that they took, and we had to account for every step, every pause, and within that, obviously, it was also built for the journey of the camera. So the interesting stuff in many ways would have been to cover everything that happened almost before we started shooting.
I'm curious, when did you realize that you wanted, how long had you been thinking about doing something along these lines in terms of trying to make it feel like one take?
Not that long, to be honest with you. I didn't think, oh, I've got to find a subject matter that I can do in one take. I did enjoy, we did the first 8 minutes of Spectre as one shot, and that was hugely enjoyable and challenging because it was 4,000 costumed extras and the whole of Mexico City shut down and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I felt like a real proper movie director on those few days. But I wasn't looking for some way of using that. It was when I had the idea for the movie and I felt it should be told in 2 hours of real time, it then felt like a logical progression from that moment, that we would experience every passing second with the men and understand distance and physical difficulty and geography with them. You know, it's a very present tense story, but it's a very present tense war as well. You know, it was not a war there was no communication. So, you know, men only saw just as far as they could see, as it were, you know. And it felt like the right way to tell the story. And because it came with the material, it felt like a single piece, content and form combined. And I think that's why everyone, you know, once they'd read the script, Roger included, particularly Roger, of course, was my chief collaborator from the word go, understood it was integral to the story rather than it just being something that was tacked on.
Roger, talk a little bit about what was that first phone call like or first meeting when he hit you up with, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and was it even a moment where you're like, we're not doing this?
Yeah, a lot. No, he just sent me the script. He didn't talk about the one shot. He just said it was, I forget what he said. It was just a film set in World War I, so I was immediately hooked. But the front page of the script said it was, you know, this is envisioned as a single shot in real time. So I thought that was kind of odd.
I saw some of the behind-the-scenes footage and saw some of the camera rigs that were designed for this. Could you sort of talk about what you had to do to actually bring this to life and, you know, the technology you sort of had to develop?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a film could have been made a few years ago. I mean, it's a combination of, you know, small digital camera, you know, some rigs that have been around for a while, like there's some Steadicam work in it, but mostly it's shot on a little remote head called a Stabilize that's only been out for a couple of years. It's made in England by a guy called Dave Freeth. You know, and then Pete Kabakutu, who was a Steadicam operator, he invented a little, it's like a little Steadicam post that we put the Stabilize in, because, you know, you might not think it, but going down those trenches in front of somebody is like really hard, especially when there's a foot of mud and it's slipping around and there's all the extras and stuff. So Peter invented this little pod so he could run forward, but the camera's over his shoulder and I'm operating it remotely on a little stabilized head. And then he'd get to the end of a, you know, corner of a trench and he'd swing himself round and then start running after them. It's pretty neat. I mean, you wouldn't think that was the hardest shot, but it probably was.
It's crazy what you guys accomplished on this. I am curious, and I think a lot of people are curious when you watch this, which was the shot for you, or which was the day that you're like, you know, throwing shit in the air and like, come on, you know what I mean, the back-breaking day?
The difficult shots in the movie, for me, were the shots actually that were about performance. You know, because the engineering, as Roger says, we did beforehand a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about how, but the why of it is, in a way, more interesting, you know. And Roger and I started with why for about 3 months. We just talked about, well, where should the camera go? And the only rule we had was, let's not worry too much about the engineering yet. Let's just imagine where we feel it should go to express the emotion of the scene, to express what we need to express that's important for the story. and so that dance that was created between the choreography, really, between the camera, the characters, and the landscape, all three of which are moving all the time, it almost never stops. And even when we do stop, camera often continues because it's expressing something about the scene. So, for example, in Blake's death, when he's wounded, the camera circles him a couple of times. That's instinct. That's just me and Roger going, well, what about this? What about that? And, unless we both agreed on it, then we didn't do it, really. And I obviously trust him implicitly. But it was about trying to develop a language for the camera that was specific to our movie. And we couldn't find any other movies in which the camera was used in this way. I mean, there are other one-shot movies, but they're all different in many ways. I mean, one I admired was Birdman, but Birdman's interiors, and it takes place over 4 days, and it's sort of like dreamlike, and it almost goes in circles through the same locations. It's quite different. This is very linear and constantly moving forward. So, we talked about other movies, but we couldn't find anything that was... So really, we ended up... it's good for us, really, because we had to work it out ourselves. There was nothing we could refer to. But the difficult days, when you've rehearsed the camera move, and thought about the journey very carefully, the difficulty with a movie like this is combining with the precision you need with camera, with spontaneity in front of the camera. You don't want people over-rehearsed or robotic in front of the camera. So for me, the most difficult day was Blake's death, because I had to try and stop Dean giving a performance until we were ready to capture that performance. And if you think about that shot, it was something like 6.5, 7 minutes. It's a long, long time. And even if the camera had been in the wrong place for 1 second, if his hand, after he dies even, when Schofield puts the rings in his pocket, or it comes round behind Schofield and you see the photograph that he's taken out of his pocket covered in blood, or any of those little things go wrong, and the whole take is unusable, the whole thing. You can't just say, oh, well, use the first bit, because there's nowhere to cut. So we had to, it's that balance between trying to find the right moment where the person gives the performance and making sure camera's ready to capture it, and they haven't used up all their good stuff while the camera's still learning the shot. So that's the most difficult thing. The one that we probably storyboarded and debated the most, Roger and I, was going across the canal. I don't know why that was, but I suppose it was something to do with the fact I didn't want Schofield to suddenly turn into James Bond, and be able to suddenly become a hero, an action hero. If there was heroism in the movie, it was always accidental heroism, the heroism of a good man trying to do the best in the circumstances and finding impossibly huge reserves of bravery, almost when he himself didn't know he was capable of doing that. And so trying to test every moment out so it didn't seem too extraordinary what he was doing, but on a human level, completely extraordinary. So it was just that balance, and it had to be in the shot, and the way that it was constructed. So that, for me, was probably the one. We maybe done 4 or 5 different storyboards of that sequence and rewrote it until we found the right version that felt like it was our movie. So that's a very long answer. I apologize.
What was the most takes you did on what scene, and what was the fewest you did?
Well, the fewest we did in the movie. In other words, the last shot of Richard Madden, the whole last scene that starts really with Schofield coming out of the tent and goes up to the end of the movie. That's one shot. That was take 1. So Richard Madden's performance is take 1, him sitting at the tree, take 1, and the sun coming out was take 1. It was a moment Roger had planned very carefully until that moment. And
you don't know how hard that is.
Yeah, that was take 1. But we probably did 10 takes of that. I reckon we never did less than 10. And we did as many as 50. I think maybe we did 51. Andrew Scott's scene, we maybe got up into the 50s.
Was that a result of, because of camera, you weren't happy with certain things, performance?
The operator was just about dead.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. You don't, some of these rigs, the Trinity, the big stabilizer, the big Steadicam rig, it's heavy, and just the athleticism necessary to just do it, and the control necessary. But No, why it was because one take, 5 takes were gone because the lighter didn't work, and then the cigarette went out, and then the props broke, and then Blake couldn't get the gun in his pocket. You remember all those ones, and just that sort of stuff, which normally would not be an issue. But when you're shooting 6 minutes, and it's an entire scene, that, like I said, you can have 5 minutes of magic, and then Blake doesn't get the flare gun in his pocket, and the whole take's dead, and you have to start again. And often that takes another 5 or 6 takes to get back up to the place that you were, because the actors are thinking, what did I do in the good take? What I'm trying to remember what I did. And you have to, again, get them out of their own head and start them operating on instinct again. So it's a rhythm thing too, And at the same time, I'm learning about the rhythm of the scene and thinking, that pause is too long. Should I be holding is there a possible look from Schofield to Blake there? Should he take his cigarette from behind his ear before he gets out of the dugout or after he gets out of the dugout? I mean, these are, should Schofield be loading his gun on the line or after the line? And these are things that, Now, the irony is, it sounds like it was a tough day, but it was just a day. And the truth is, in a conventional movie, if that scene had been broken up into its component parts, it probably would have been 16 to 18 setups, and it would have taken 2 days. So even though it was a tough day, we ripped through it actually quite fast by the standards of a normal movie, because we would have had so many different setups to cover, because they're moving the whole time. And you'd have wanted to get every angle. But it makes you become very aware as a director of how often you break things up before you've actually understood the scene, because it's the easiest way to shoot it. You default very quickly as a director to, okay, close up, over the shoulder, 2-shot, moving shot, fancy shot every 3 scenes, 12 setup, okay, let's go. And it's, hang on a second. Editing is a wonderful and powerful tool, jump space, time, whatever. But do you have to edit all the time? Do you always have to see everyone when they're speaking their line? And the answer to that is no. I mean, there's a lot of lines in this movie that are spoken off camera. But that's to do with the way the scene's staged and constructed for the shot. It just means you have to think more about it and plan it much more.
I'm curious, usually with every movie, there's the first cut, the director's cut, the final cut. I'm assuming with this, the first cut was the final cut.
It's my best first cut ever. Man, I was so on camera. But I mean, this film was basically being built as Sam was shooting it, and we were constructing it, sending it back, and that was informing what they were shooting the next day, rhythm, pace, we'd be talking about that the whole time. Because, as Sam said, and I had the same experience as Roger did when he sent me the script, and he said it was to be seen as one shot, which I laughed at. And when I read the script, I continued to laugh, thinking, that's not going to happen. They're going to try it, but it's not going to work. But it did, and it worked really well. But, yeah, I've lost my train of thought.
So just to confirm, there's nothing on the cutting room floor, no deleted scenes, or is there?
If there was.
There's 2 seconds at the very end when Schofield's leaning against the tree where he's still closing his eye. No, there's nothing. I mean, they actually did ask me, though, DVD, they did ask me, is there any deleted scene? I'm like, there's not even a deleted second, not a deleted word, Nothing is deleted. No, I mean, it was very...
You got to think about it, because how do you delete a scene? Because then the previous scene wouldn't match the next scene. Because every shot we did, we would have to watch the end of the A, and going into the B, they had to match.
Believe me, I understand. I just think that it's good to actually establish there is nothing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I am curious, talk a little bit about lighting this movie and the challenges of doing these incredibly long takes and trying to make the light perfect, because I believe, and again, I could be wrong, you were trying to film a lot with clouds in front of the sun. And
it had to be. I mean, just for the look of the film, we wanted it cloudy. It's meant to be late afternoon going into evening. You're never going to shoot in the sunlight. It's going to be all over the place. So that was a given. But also in terms of matching from setup to setup, it made much more sense to be in cloud. But that was a really hard thing, even in England. I mean, the first day of the shoot, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, so we didn't shoot. And I'm a kind of nervous wreck. But thankfully, the second day we had cloud, and we managed to get what we were supposed to do the day before and that day. So, you know, there was a lot of watching the sky and judging how long a cloud was going to be in front of the sun. Could we get a 6-minute take with that one cloud, or is it going to break up? And I'm a meteorologist now, I really am.
I want to do a follow-up.
I'm just, you know, it's deceptive, the movie, though, because actually there are a lot of interiors, and there is a lot of brilliant interior lighting, and the nighttime town, and you know, Roger spent weeks, you know, basically constructing torches, for example, so that the boys could light their own scene effectively when they go into the German dugout, the tunnels. You know, the gas lamps that are in the dugouts, the flares, the burning church at night, which was an immense rig, and you know, you know, effectively dictated how the set was constructed around it. Those are, you know, extraordinary lighting rigs that Roger designed effectively, and the same with the flares. You know, the flares are on wires, and they're timed. You know, so you've got a 32-second flare and a 22-second flare and 18-second. But I can even remember the times, as I'm sure you can, and exactly the direction. We built models with little miniature lights, you know, so that we could see where the shadows were going to stretch to, and you know, and where to put the buildings to create the shadows in the first place. And so that really was that there is actually a large amount of lighting, but it's it's done all as source, and it is artful on Roger's part.
I actually wanted to specifically ask you about filming with the flares, because it's so beautiful to look at. Can you talk about what went into, for you, putting that stuff together?
Well, that was our effects guy, Dom Tui. I did a fantastic job, because he had these flares made up that were a particular color we wanted. We didn't want, you know, normally you can get blue flares that are very bright, but we didn't want blue. So he did a great job. And as Sam says, Dennis Gassner and the art department built a whole model of that town. So we had where the church light was going to be, and then these little wire rigs with little LEDs on, so we could see the pattern of the light from the flares. So then we could mark out where the cranes needed to be for Dom. So Dom put them in, and computer controlled the speed and everything. I mean, it was incredibly worked out. I was a bit skeptical, actually, the real flares were going to work, and I had a kind of light made up to do it with the light, but I'm damn glad I didn't use it. That was good.
My nerdy question, what kind of cameras did you guys use, and why?
It was an Alexa LF large format mini, and Araflex, it's out now on the market, but they made 3 prototypes for us for this film, so it's the first film that's shot with it, yeah.
Well, it's not much bigger than a transistor radio. I mean, it's an incredible image from a very tiny body, and it was quite comic when it was on a 200-foot crane, because you know the crane was enormous, and it looked like a tiny little dot on the end of this crane. You know, crane kind of seems to demand a big old Panavision camera, you know, whirring away, and it doesn't work like that anymore.
Did you guys use any sort of special lenses, or?
We used one lens, a 40 millimeter. Well, we actually, I lie, because in the German bunker we used a 35, and on the river we used a 47, but very sparingly. But basically, again, you've got to shoot it on the same lens, otherwise it's not going to match from shot to shot. The perspective would be different. So we chose a 40 because on a large format it has a kind of field of view of something slightly more than the 32 probably, but it's still got that fall off in focus of a 40 mil. And for me, it looked more like the images, you know, the black and white photographs from the First World War, where you've got this sort of fairly shallow depth of field. I mean, I really like that format for this.
What's interesting about this film is that you really couldn't repeat any locations. Did you repeat any locations?
No.
Right, so talk a little bit about having to essentially build all this, because these trenches and everything you guys did for the film, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in a normal movie, you would build, you know, 200 yards of trenches, and then you would redress them, you know, put new background in, turn it around, maybe do a Mexican reverse, shoot in the other direction, or whatever. You would find a way to reuse them, but there was no way to do that, obviously, because it was one continuous, ever evolving. And also, I was very concerned with that. Every location, the shift in atmosphere, the second line trench, which is the trench they come out onto after they leave Erin Moore's dugout, Colin Firth's scene, is quite different in atmosphere. It passes through bombed out cottages and what have you. And the front line trench has a sort of, there's something dead about it. It's waiting and more waiting, and it seems like it's been hit more by shell fire, which it has. So each trench needed a different personality, even different stretches of trench. It was one of the things Roger and I realized when we went to northern France ourselves, is that the way the trench falls against the light and which direction it's pointing in shifts the atmosphere. So even as you're walking, it changes, and some feel weird little corners, and others feel very exposed. And the parapets rising and falling the whole time. I mean, it has such personality because they lived there. I mean, they lived in this place for 3 years, 4 years. So it needed to feel layers and layers of mud and destruction, and people slept there, shat there, died there. I mean, it's grim, So that feeling is particularly present on the front line. But it's what I said earlier. We had to construct a set for a journey, and so it never stops. So it's a ribbon. It's an endless snake of a set. And the job seemed to me, particularly when they got out of the trenches, to feel like the world went way beyond the frame of the camera. And because, so for example, No Man's Land, which was a big challenge for us, because, it's a good example in microcosm. If you look at a photo of No Man's Land, you just see flat land and sticks of trees. That's what you see. You think, oh, it's just flat mud. But then you enter that world, it is an entire world unto itself. It's a land of craters and dead horses and flies and wires and dead bodies and tanks, and and every second of it has detail and shifts in atmosphere and direction and the way the light falls, all of those things, and also the way in which the characters react to it. You've got one character who's already established, Schofield, as somebody who knows what he's going to see or has been there before. And if you look at it, if you watch the movie again, you'll see that George and Schofield doesn't look at anything on No Man's Land. He just keeps his eyes straight ahead. He doesn't look at the dead bodies. He doesn't look at the flies. Blake, on the other hand, is watching everything. And so you're telling two different sets of stories. There's two different ways of coping with it as well. And even within that, the relationship between the camera, sometimes it's the camera moving around them, sometimes it's them moving in relation to the camera. For example, when you go down into the big crater, they have to go around the perimeter of the crater. The camera skims across the surface of the water. So in that moment, you see them small, they disappear a little bit into the mist, then they return again. That sort of dance, and you've got to. We weren't responding to land because the land didn't exist. We had to create the land and then make the shot within it. And that's quite different. It wasn't like we just turned up and saw No Man's Land and thought, how are we going to shoot this? We had to make it out of nothing and then find a way for the camera to rate it. So sometimes it's the camera dictating what the set should be, and sometimes it's the other way around, but you can't ever quite put your finger on what came first. And that's why it was such a unified, there's such a team effort, it's a group of us all working at it at the same time. The actors, for the whole of prep, just rehearsing, just walking those routes until we found what we thought the answer was.
You co-wrote the script, and I'm curious, how did the script and story change once you started being in prep and doing all this stuff with camera moves and the locations? Did things change a lot?
The story never changed. The story structure was always the same. I always felt very solid about what happened when. And to a certain degree, you can't really change it. The trenches are the trenches, the No Man's Land, everything had to have a logic. So that didn't change. But lots of little things changed all the time. And particularly because I was watching the two boys doing it, I was able to let them do it for weeks and just observe them without directing them particularly hard. And yeah, there were lots of little things, little adjustments we made to their parts which took it closer to them, or I was watching what they were doing naturally with each other, and that I was able to make adjustments all the time. Things they probably weren't even that aware of. You know, oh, you don't need to say that line, just do that with a look, or, you know, maybe switch those lines around, and it just happened organically. So by the time we came to shoot, they were rock solid about what they were doing, what they were saying, how they were moving. They'd been wearing their uniforms for 6 months, they'd been handling their weapons, they'd been to boot camp, they'd been to France, they'd been everywhere, and they were sort of in it. And that wasn't inappropriate, because I was encouraging them to sort of live it as much as to act it.
I'm curious, which scene, which one was the toughest one to pick a take on? Meaning, like, did you have a certain scene that take 10, 12, and 14 were all just amazing?
Oh, nearly every day. There was literally, you know, I was spoilt for choice. And I think when Sam and I were talking about it, we might be kicking around 6 brilliant takes, you know, and then trying to whittle that down to the one, you know, what one gets to be the one. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was a day when it was just one take. Like, they were always like...
No, but talk about the last shot of the movie, because that was, you were very particular about that. That was the one which is the first take that we use, and why?
Oh, yes. The one where Blake's brother, Sco, meets Blake's brother at the end. It's a highly emotional thing, and I think we had 9 or 12 takes. And I remember when I was watching it, the first take was incredibly emotional. Like, I'm sitting in Soho, not on location, looking at a giant screen, feeling like I'm watching a movie. And that take rolled through, and I was like choking up and going, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, what a way to end a movie. That was take 1. And then, you know, by the other takes went through, and the acting was fantastic. Everything was incredible. But the camera was getting closer and closer to Richard Madden, Blake's brother. And it was a tighter and a tighter shot. And then I remember getting to the end and going, well, you know, those last couple of takes, they were amazing. But they still didn't hit me the way the first take hit me. And then I went back and looked at it again. And the reason that I think I really liked it was because the camera was looser. It involved George in the scene. Whereas as the camera got closer, George kind of lessened in the scene. And I was saying to Sam that it's George's film, and it needs to be him and the brother, it's not all about the brother. So we talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of something, of Lee saying something that I don't think, I certainly hadn't noticed. I'm not even sure Roger had, because it was incremental. Every take got a little bit closer, and I don't think we noticed it. But the moment Lee said it, I thought, he's absolutely right. You know, you feel Schofield's presence in that scene, and the more we went on, the less and less you felt it. Now, as it happened, on top of that, it was also a very beautiful performance from Richard, and the sun came out and all of those other things. But that's a good example of why Lee was so crucial, because until he said it, I absolutely would not have noticed that. Because there's so much information in the shots, you know, that's a long shot. The last thing you're looking at is, oh, we're about 6 inches closer than we were on the first take. You just don't notice.
Roger, if I can ask you...
By the way, we did that deliberately so they would only use the first take.
I knew it!
Roger. Roger, there are so many amazing shots in this film. I'm curious, which one for you is there one that you felt that was like just really incredibly difficult to get right? Or one that, you know what I mean? If you could just talk about some of the incredible work you did.
Well, they're difficult for different reasons. Like I said, the hardest thing is like for an operator is like, you know, walking backwards with 2 guys in a trench. I mean, that was really hard. But a lot of it that you think was really hard. But I mean, they're going across that bridge in Glasgow. We worked it out. I mean, we did a mock-up on the back lot in Shepperton with scaffold towers and the cranes. It's a 4-point wire rig, and at one point the camera's taken off the wire, and then they run with it and go up the steps to the lockhouse. I mean, it looks an incredibly hard shot, and probably if I watch it again in a year or two, I think, my God, that's really hard. But because we had so much prep, we worked out the shot. As Sam said, we storyboarded it a number of times, worked out what we wanted, tested it on the back lot. We went to Glasgow, and the shot was there. The guys had rigged it. The camera was, it's controlled by, it's computer program, so they took the same program from what we'd done on the back lot in Shepperton and did it in Glasgow. So when we got there, it was all there. I mean, we changed the curve and all that a little bit, but it was basically done. So the time we got to shooting these things on set, we had rehearsed them so many times. I mean, one of the hardest shots was the singing soldier. I mean, you start coming up the hill, and you don't end until you're running towards the front line. And that whole choreographed shot of that moving, that's an incredibly hard shot for an operator to do. But we spent days and days in a field with extras rehearsing that shot. So by the time we came to do it with the actors, it was pretty well programmed.
When you're doing that take, that scene is so beautiful. When it's going on and it's so perfect, how scared are you that one of those extras is just going to look at the lens or just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it did happen. But the funny thing is, it's like what I was saying earlier, you want to encourage a kind of freedom as well. So you don't want it to be too sort of, people terrified they're going to fuck up a take, and they try too hard. They need to live in the space. So you're trying to actually weirdly encourage not too much thought. I mean, a good example of that is in one of the shots that I would say is probably one of the most difficult, well, certainly on the day but it was exhilarating, is that final run that George takes down, that Schofield takes down the front line as they're all pouring over the top. And when he gets knocked off his feet, that was not planned. That was extremely adrenalized extra. Thinking, it's one take, I had said to him beforehand, listen, if somebody knocks you over, just try to keep going, and he did, and it's in the movie. So that's what you're looking for, and that happened a few times, even though the camera was pretty, as Roger said, we'd rehearsed it so well, but you want life to enter in somehow. You want mess, and there are animals and babies, and the weather changes, and the light changes, and conditions change, and you fall in the mud. If you fall in the mud, it's your character falling in the mud. Get up again, and don't let it stop you, unless obviously something badly goes wrong, you have to stop. But mostly, I just encourage them to get through to the end, and knowing that there was a likelihood I wasn't going to say cut, and half the time, if I'd said cut, they wouldn't have heard me anyway, because they were about half a mile away by the time, But knowing that gives them a freedom. Okay, they just got to go. And that also, for me, comes from the theatre a little bit, that thing of trusting the actor to, okay, we've rehearsed a while now, it's yours, you take it, see what happens. And trying to find a way of combining that with everything that we'd planned on camera was part of the challenge.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really want to say to you guys, congratulations on making one of the best films of this year. It's a stunning cinematic achievement.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's just incredible. One more time, I want to say a huge thank you to ArcLight Cinemas, a huge thank you to Universal Pictures, a huge thank you to Roger Deakins, Lee Smith, Sam Mendes for doing this Q&A.
Pleasure.
And on that note, every movie needs extra support. So if you go on social, please mention if you enjoyed the movie. Tweet about it, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you use. On that note, thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.